Hello and welcome to this demonstration on Aviatrix Kickstart. Aviatrix Kickstart is an all-in-one containerized software package that deploys the Aviatrix controller and optionally a global transit use case in AWS and Azure along with test instances in AWS. This drastically simplifies Aviatrix deployment, allowing you to experience the benefit of the Aviatrix cloud networking platform for less than $1 an hour. In this demonstration, the following modular components are installed. There's the Aviatrix controller, the Aviatrix multi-cloud network architecture or MCNA transit in AWS and in Azure that are later peered, and a couple of test instances in AWS. It does this by running a Docker container on your client PC. In my example, I have Docker Desktop running on a Mac. You can also run it on Windows or on Linux. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing to do is run the Docker command to retrieve the Docker Kickstart image and run. Then we're prompted for our AWS access key ID and secret access key. These can be obtained from the AWS console under My Security Credentials. Next, we are asked whether we want to launch the controller. Since I haven't done this before, I will say yes. After that, we're directed to the AWS Marketplace to subscribe to the Aviatrix platform. Click Continue to subscribe and accept the terms and conditions if you already haven't done so. In my case, I had already done that, so I'm ready to proceed. After that, the settings file for the controller opens up in the VI text editor. This is where you can change the region, the availability zone, or the VPC CIDR for the controller. I'm going to leave everything as default. After that, the controller is built and its public IP address is displayed. Some tweaks are done on the controller behind the scenes as it is initialized. Then I'm prompted for a recovery email address and a password for the admin account. After doing that, the Aviatrix controller is upgraded. Once it's upgraded, we're asked whether we want to launch the Aviatrix Transit in AWS. I'm going to say yes. It's then going to open the MCNA configuration file. Here I can set the region and the names of the resources. I'm going to leave everything as default, which will build the resources in AWS EU West 1 region, which is in Ireland. It will then build out the 2 spoke VPCs, 2 Aviatrix spoke gateways, 1 transit VPC, and an Aviatrix transit gateway, all in AWS. After the AWS transit is created, we're asked whether we want to launch EC2 test instances in the spoke VPCs. I said yes, and then the same MCNA config file reopens, and I have an opportunity to enter the name of my SSH key pair. I give it a name, and then I save the file. Now, for this to work, we must have an SSH key pair in the region where the EC2 instances will be created. So I go to EU West 1 region and import a key that I already have on my computer. You can also create a brand new key if you wish. After the EC2 instances have been created, we are asked whether we want to launch an Aviatrix Transit in Azure. I chose yes, and then the same MCNA config file is opened. Now for Azure, there are 4 essential pieces of information to successfully onboard an account. We need the subscription ID, the directory ID, which is also known as the tenant ID, the application ID, and the application key or secret. Aviatrix documentation shows you how to get all of this information, but I will show you how I went about doing it. The first thing to do is to go to Azure Active Directory Service and register an application. Next, we create a subscription. To do that, we go to Access IAM and we assign a contributor role to the app that we just created. After that, we go back to Azure Active Directory and click on the app registration. From there, I retrieve the directory ID. Do the same for the application ID. The last piece of information is the application key. For that, we go to Certificates and Secrets. We create a new client secret. We set it to never expire. The final step of the process is to go to Request API Permissions and add a permission for Azure Service Management. And that's it. So now I go back to the script and I paste these pieces of information starting with the subscription ID, the directory ID, the application ID, and finally the application key, which is also called client secret. And we're done with Azure onboarding. Once we're done with the onboarding section, we can proceed with building out the Azure Transit. Remember that this is going to create 2 Spoke VNets and 1 Transit VNet. Inside each Spoke VNet, there's going to be an Aviatrix Spoke Gateway, and inside the Transit VNet, there's going to be an Aviatrix Transit Gateway. And then encrypted tunnels will be created between the Spoke and the Transit gateways. Okay, now that everything has been built out, we can take the public IP address of the controller and launch it in a browser. But first, take a moment to recap what we've built. On the controller dashboard, you can see all the resources that we've created. On the dashboard map, you can see a geographic representation of the topology that we just built. Notice how it includes real-time latency. Next is to do some end-to-end validation. For this, we can run the flight path tool and pick the test instances in AWS Spoke VPC 1 and in AWS Spoke VPC 2. We can then run a ping test between the two on their private interfaces and see the data points that were tested along the way. Similarly for SSH, TCP port 22, the security groups, NACLs, which network access control lists, the route tables, and everything else is green, and that is good. Finally, we run a test for HTTPS, which is TCP port 443, and that fails. And if we look more closely at the security group on the AWS console, we can see why. It's because the TCP port 443 is currently not permitted. Thanks for watching this demonstration of Aviatrix Kickstart. We hope you will use it to kickstart your Aviatrix deployments.